Major League Baseball is the only sport where roulette and 50-50 would actually be used in the same sentence, because if you're in the NBA and you have a lottery pick and you do not get a star, if not a starter, if not an all-star, if you don't have someone on your team the next season who is performing, you have failed. The odds are way better in the NFL and NBA that you will get a player of impact in the first round. MLB is completely different than that. It is absolutely a spin of the wheel. We did many, many studies, analytics. We counted cups of coffee by first-round picks, impact first-round picks. It really is harder than you think to find a player, whether he is in high school or in college, who can make it and develop all the way and get to the big leagues and be a performing player. Tonight is the MLB draft. Are you ready? I'll be on CBS Sports HQ starting at 7 o'clock on June 10th, 2020. It's a Wednesday. The reason I'll be on HQ is I'll be talking about the draft from a front office standpoint, all of the things that go into a draft. What is the reality as a team president, as a GM, how you look at these kids, how you look at these young men and try to discern how quickly they'll be able to help you. Of course, the draft is going to be virtual today. It's always virtual. What we used to do is fly. MLB would invite your VIPs to the room in New Jersey where MLB Network has a studio. And so we would send representatives like Jack McKeon. Sometimes we'd send our old traveling secretary named Bill Beck, one of the most famous traveling secretaries of all time in the industry. Maybe we'd send Andre Dawson or Tony Perez or Jeff Conine or Juan Pierre, somebody who would put a good face as a Marlin. There'd be a phone in front. And then whether your GM is Larry Beinfest or Mike Hill, whoever it is, they would be in a draft room. They would call the phone number and they'd say, Jack, we're drafting Yelich. It doesn't mean one thing, right? That's just telling them the way the draft actually works. It's always virtual. The reality is that each player actually has a number. Let's say 867-5309 is the number of the player you want to draft. So you actually enter into a computer system and you say on the phone, the GM does, the Marlins with the third pick in the draft will be taking player number 867-5309, John Doe, right-handed pitcher, Minnesota. I have no idea why I just made that up. Some of you may know why 867-5309 is a great draft number. So it is virtual. We'll see where the commissioner is. We'll see what they do. We have always had draft envy. There's a dollar, Coca. They've always had draft envy at Major League Baseball, wanting the draft to be as exciting as it is in the NBA or NFL, wanting to get crowds of people and make it a huge deal. It's going to be simulcast tonight like the NFL draft was, I believe. It's just hard to get the attention because fan engagement is not as significant because they've just not heard of these players before. You know that college basketball players being drafted, they come out of college, the NCAA tournament. People have heard of them. They've rooted for them. They've bet on them or against them. In the NFL, college football, they were in the bowl. They were in the championship game, in a bowl game. Not in MLB. Some of them are in the Omaha World Series. Most of them are high schoolers, but most of them no one's ever heard of. So we'll see if MLB, through its virtual program, does something like the NFL did, if there'll be a big video in the beginning. Maybe Dr. Fauci, although I think Dr. Fauci. Has anyone seen Dr. Fauci? I got an APB out for Dr. Fauci. He used to be on TV all the time. All of a sudden, no one liked what he was saying. And guess what happens? You're off TV. But I think he's still doing his job. Maybe there'll be some sort of video about what's going on in the world. Maybe with the demonstrations, the protests. I don't know. Wait to see. Not my wait to see, but we're going to see tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, CBS Sports HQ. Tune in. Me and my beard will be there. My beard and I will be there. So what am I looking for in this draft? Just three things. I want to point out a few interesting nuggets about this year's draft that make it different. Number one, it's 5 rounds instead of 40 rounds, which simply means that owners and presidents and GMs can't draft their cousins or their friends' children, which is something that would often happen as a fun little gift and resume builder in the 39th or 40th round. There's only 5 rounds. It means that all of the great players drafted after the 5th round, which every draft is measured when we would evaluate our scouting director, we would use the first round a bit, but we would really look deep in the draft and say, where's the value? Because the mock drafts that everyone does, all the media does, what we would do as a front office, we would have the first round done. We'd have a board of players, people we wanted in order. It would have nothing to do with the mock draft. And the interesting part about it is that in the first round, it wouldn't matter to us what mock draft people would be saying. All that would matter is how we would order the players. So we would put names on a board, and it would go 1 through 100. Those are the top 100 players we actually would want, having nothing to do with what other teams would want. We then would have a category of players based on their signability. We've spoken to the agents, and the agent wants more money than we're willing to pay to this player, so that player would be said to be not signable. Then we'd have a list of players who are 2-sport athletes, those players who are threatening to play football or basketball. Then we'd have a list of players who are threatening to go to college, and then we would break down that list into we believe them or we don't believe them. Then we'd have a list of college juniors and how quickly they would be able to get to the big leagues. This is going to be important right now. Because in a draft like today, where today's the first round, 7 o'clock, first 37 picks, because that includes a competitive balance round. Doesn't really matter what that means, except some teams get extra picks. Tomorrow will be competitive balance round B, which are other teams getting extra picks who don't violate certain rules and are low revenue. And then you'll have the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th round tomorrow. So why am I saying that in a 5-round draft, it's going to look different today? The reason is because the way the season is going right now, where we're looking at 50 to 60 to 70 games in an absolute sprint, where there's been a full off season following a very short spring training, like a month spring training, then another practical full off season. And now we're going to start another spring training part 2 and then play whether it's 50, 60, 70, 80 games. It doesn't matter. And then there could be 16 teams in the playoffs. That does matter because all the teams, with maybe 3 or 4 exceptions, will think they have a shot. But there's going to be more injuries this year than other years. And there could be players who are opting out, deciding not to play. We're going to talk about all that next segment. But the fact is that this year, as you're looking at your draft, you want to draft players who are closer to the big leagues. I believe that college players will be drafted early and often. And I believe those college players have a far better chance to move through the system way faster than normal. Number one, there is no system right now. These college players could easily be brought right into spring training starting whenever it starts in the next 2-3 weeks and be part of a 50-man roster. The difference between college players and high school players always was that high school players have higher upside. College players have higher probability. They are what they are. You scout them, you see them. In this case, there's been a whole year of scouting missed because high school games and seasons were canceled for the most part. The college season was canceled. While you've been following players sometimes since they were 15 years old, you are missing any sort of recent data about their abilities. But yet, when a pitcher can throw 99 miles an hour, has a wipeout slider, has the ability to be polished, and that pitcher is in high school, no way that pitcher is going to see the big leagues this year. But if that pitcher's 21 years old, a junior in college, there's a far better chance. So what I'm looking for are more college players to be drafted than high school players because owners are going to trump their GMs and say, listen, we need to draft players who are quicker and quicker to the big leagues. There's a rumor going on right now that the Angels in the 10th slot could actually not draft a player. What's interesting about that is the Angels have been rumored to have been hardline on a lot of financial issues right now. And I believe that it's not going to happen, but here's why I have sometimes suggested to our baseball people that we skip a pick. And this is going to, I don't think I've ever discussed this publicly. It is going to cause great consternation with people in our old scouting department. But here's the reality. When I'm faced with a budget deficit and I'm looking at ways to cut, and the reality is that I don't want to have to cut the payroll anymore because that would mean maybe trading away a fifth or sixth starter or not having depth on the bench or maybe even getting a starting center fielder or bottom of the order bat. When I'm looking at numbers, I look at a first round pick who in our slot is supposed to be paid $6 million. I'm looking at players who the scouting department say, this is once in a generational talent. Scouting directors, and listen, all respect, it is an impossible job. You are trying to project that Christian Yelich is going to become Christian Yelich. And Christian Yelich, who had a beautiful swing in high school, but he was practically my size, very sort of thin and not built out. He had no power. Yet the scouts say he is going to hit for power. He's going to hit for average. He is going to be an MVP candidate. This is someone you want to have in your system. And you meet him and you've just given him a ton of money and you're saying to yourself, really? Really? So when I'm going through a budget, I say to myself, I can save $6 million here, not draft someone in the first round, try to find a nugget in the later rounds for a much smaller signing bonus, and save that money and move it to the big league payroll. Could the Angels do that? Maybe, but I don't think so. This year especially, I think you will see all teams, let's just say the top 10 from the Tigers down to the Angels, they will take a player who they believe can help them as quickly as possible or is a stud high schooler who has a long-term MVP type of upside. But after 5 rounds, what happens? And by the way, let me just mention why I can promise you that that's going to happen is in the old days, like last year, when you draft a player for $6 million, you actually have to pay out that money. They get approved. You have till, let's say, August 1st to sign the player. Then they get a certain amount of money within 30 days of their signing, up to half, and you can delay half only up to a year after they are drafted. Now the rules are that if a player gets drafted for $6 million this year, the owners only have to pay that player $100,000 within 30 days of that player signing. And then July of 2021, they pay half of the remaining $5.9 million. And then July of 22, they pay the other half. All deferred, no interest. Not great for the players, I grant you, the kids who were signed who need that money, but really good for the owners and for the cash flow and for the budget. By the way, another thing, the current players like Sean Doolittle let happen in that March agreement while they were supposed to be taking care of this generation of players. But I digress. So when you sit and watch the draft unfold, I want to bring you inside the draft room and inside what is happening between people in the draft room and the front office and how you lead up to that draft room. There is no group of people I've ever come across in baseball more paranoid than scouts. They would come to me and tell me stories. I stayed in my car, David. No one saw me looking at Giancarlo Stanton. I didn't go to one Jose Fernandez game, David, not one. And when I had someone else go who no one would recognize, they stood out in the outfield with a little binocular Binoculars. David, we have to change the locks in the scouting department room where we're going to have our draft war room, they called it. I used to hate that. It's not a war room. This is not the Churchill war rooms. This is scouting major league potential players. Let's get some perspective, folks. We're going to have to change the locks. I would get a call from our head of stadium operations. David, I just heard from baseball. They need locks. They need the windows covered. They need a memo to go out that nobody shall enter the room. No cleaning people. Nobody. Because cleaning people could look at the board, take a picture, and know that the Marlins in the 7th round have an interest in Dr. Cocktoaston. That's from Fletch, by the way. Dr. Rosen. Remember that? It's a good scene. Check it out. I always laughed, but I always gave in to the baseball side because I didn't want them to be distracted by any sort of possibility to have any excuse for any lack of performance in getting the right players. So we would black out the windows, lock the doors, change the locks, send a memo. No one can go close. We would put food in like Carol Baskin feeding the tigers. We would put food like on a platter and shove it into the room and quickly remove it so we wouldn't have our hands bitten off. There'd be videos going, showing videos. There'd be talking back and forth about this player, about that player. And the videos, if you've never seen a video of a potential drafted player, they're pretty funny. It's a swing of a bat at a BP, and then another swing, and it's cut and edited, so it's swing after swing after swing, and then an at bat, and he'd run to first. Look at that speed. That guy's got plus speed. Look at that swing. That's going to play. That swing plays. Look at that. Well, that's a repeatable delivery, they would say about pitchers. That's repeatable. That's important. That's a little funky. We're a little worried about that. Listen, we spoke to his coach. There could be a drug issue. He's also not really social. Hey, we spoke to his parents. This is a good guy, but hey, he's got Boris as an agent. By the way, on the board would also be every player agent. This is a very inexact science with men who spend up to 280 to 290 days on the road, going from airport to field, looking for a diamond in the rough, trying to be right about something that is so difficult to be right in. It's a shout out right now to Jim Fleming, Stan Meek, and all the scouts who I had in my 18 years who found some unbelievable players and had some unbelievable misses. But that's what happens when the word of the day is roulette.